And with that, are there any members of the public recording this meeting today? No? Okay. And with that, we'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No one signed up for public comment.
No one signed up. Okay, and we have no public comments. Are we jumping ahead with anything, or just going to go right?
We can go right to the first presentation, please.
All right, so we're going to go right into the public hearing presentations. And the first one is presentation of the Fire Rescue and Emergency Medical Services Study by Municipal Resources Incorporated. The podium is yours, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Donald Bliss. I represent Municipal Resources Incorporated, and also my colleague, Chief Mark Cotreau, is here tonight. What I'd like to do is just run through a brief PowerPoint and give you an overview of our study, which I believe you have, and hopefully I've had a chance to review, and leave enough time for questions that you might have. So, we were engaged by the town to do an analysis. Yes, sir.
Sir, excuse me if the town administrator would like to.
Hi.
Sure.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for coming in.
Good evening.
I just wanted to just take the opportunity to really quickly explain, and I know you're going to go through it, but for the board's perspective, this study was funded with ARPA dollars, and we had done so because we had some increased, quite a bit of an increased call volume, and we wanted to see if it was due to the pandemic, and B, if some of it or a part of it was due to the pandemic, what could we do in the future to try to alleviate that, whether it's pandemic related or not. So that was the context of it. And then as a result, we went with this firm, MRI, which is, I can't say enough about working with them. Just, you all did a tremendous job. And also want to just make a note, Deputy Chief Johnson was the lead person at the fire department. I know Chief Coleman was out on medical leave at the time. So I want to thank Deputy Chief Johnson because he put a lot of time and effort into this, and also thank some of the department heads that were interviewed for part of the study. So I just wanted to tee that up a little bit, but sorry, Don, please continue. Thank you.
I'm glad you provided that background. Thank you, Julie. So as town manager indicated, we were retained to take a look at the fire department operations with a primary focus on staffing levels. But anytime we go into community, we take a general overall view to see if there are any gaps and deficiencies in the operation, staffing, facilities, equipment, apparatus, and so forth. Looking at current and future demands for service, looking at demographics, looking at growth factors in the community, looking at risk factors in the community, and then also looking at where you may want to be in the future, where we think you should be in the future with regard to fire protection and emergency medical services. So our recommendations are really in two stages, both for what we think are the current needs and then future things the community should be looking at as you are able to afford them, and then also as the community grows and changes. So our goal is to really provide a report that's going to be useful for you today and is a resource as you shape your long-term vision for the success of the Auburn Fire Rescue Department. And our guidance provides you with 35 recommendations. Now, I'm not going to go through every recommendation tonight because we certainly don't have the time, but we will highlight some of what we think are the more important ones. And hopefully you'll use this report as a roadmap for the future, and of course modify it based on local needs and resources as time goes on. So our methodology, I think, is important to mention. We did do interviews with numerous stakeholders, both within the fire department, also amongst town department heads. We looked at a lot of data, both historical data about the responses that the fire department does, and a lot of documents, standard operating procedures, mutual aid procedures, and so forth. We also did a comparison study with 5 different Massachusetts communities to give an idea where does Auburn stand on the spectrum of staffing, funding, operations, procedures, and so forth. We evaluated the fire and EMS operations, your facilities and resources, took a look at mutual aid. We look at some of the future growth impacts that will affect fire protection and emergency medical services. And we did do a one-day site visit. We were initially hampered by, during the height of COVID, of being able to come to town, but fortunately we were able to do a site visit, and that gave us a great opportunity to look at actual conditions here. So our recommendations are based, one of the nice things about the fire service is there are a lot of national standards that you can base your operations on and use as benchmarks. So our recommendations are based on those national standards, such as the one shown here, which is NFPA 1500, the standard for fire department occupational safety, health, and wellness programs. I will mention that these standards are not mandated by law, except where they might be in statute by the state or by federal requirements such as OSHA requirements. But generally speaking, they are highly recommended practices which are advisable to use for a variety of reasons. Our project team included myself. I'm not going to go into details on our background. You'll find that in the report. But I do have a 34-year fire service experience in New England, both as a municipal fire chief and at the state level as state fire marshal in New Hampshire. My colleague, Chief Cocho, is a current chief, but also had been the fire chief and emergency management director in Concord, Mass. Was involved with the Massachusetts Regional Hazmat Response Team for 19 years, is a certified chief fire officer. So we both have considerable experience dealing with Massachusetts Fire Service. So some of the challenges that you have here in Auburn, specifically with regard to the fire and EMS services, you're all familiar with the growth and the development the community is experiencing. You have significant industrial hazards and a major transportation network, not just road transportation, but a rail transportation system, which has incredible impact on your fire and EMS delivery. Like most communities now, we have an aging population, myself included in that, where we're seeing increased services to the baby boomers that are now entering assisted living and nursing facilities. You're getting new buildings, but you have a lot of aging building stock, which certainly plays a role in fire protection. Auburn is uniquely challenged with far more simultaneous incidents than we're used to seeing. Something like 37% of your incidents are happening at the same time, and so that's impacting delivery of services. You're well aware of your fire station deficiencies. We did not get into detail on that because you already have an initiative underway for the replacement and upgrading of your fire stations. We'll talk a little bit about mutual aid requests and ambulance turnaround time, and ultimately low staffing because of all of these factors. One of the very nice things, and you should be very proud of, is not only the professionalism of your town staff, department head staff that we encountered, but also the fact that there's incredibly good communications between the town leadership, the fire department leadership, and the union. We don't often see that, and they don't agree on everything, but everybody from our perspective is working in the same direction, working for the betterment of the community. And you should be very proud of that and continue to build on that success. So that's something we really wanted to highlight here. So in terms of response metrics, Auburn Fire Rescue Department averages just about 11 emergency responses per day, and this is over a 3-year average. We see that increasing over time. 72% or so are EMS incidents, which is right around consistent with the national average of fire department responses to EMS versus fire calls. In fact, in some communities, they're calling their fire departments EMS agencies that happen to have fire trucks, and that's pretty much a national trend. You're seeing around 11 structure fires per year, which is not unusual for a community this size, but that is a significant factor, the fact that these are major incidents. And as I said before, 37% are simultaneous, and you have a very good record with regard to average response time of getting to a scene from the time of dispatch to arrival of just over 4 minutes, which is really the target that you want to have. And it's difficult to see this slide, but it just shows the importance of that 4-minute response time, not only for medical calls, but also for the growth of a fire. Fires are now building at a much faster rate due to the type of materials inside of buildings. Back when I was a firefighter, I rarely saw a flashover because it would take 20 to 30 minutes to see a room erupt in a total fire situation. But nowadays, many times their flashover occurs even before the fire department arrives. And that doesn't bode well for the occupants of a building, because if you have flashover that quickly, typically you will have a fatality involved with that. So that's a critical factor with regard to response times. On our comparable cities analysis, it's helpful, but I would be very careful with how you use that data, because there is no community in Massachusetts or anywhere that's identical to Auburn in terms of its challenges, its demographics, its size, and so forth. And metrics that are used by communities for their fire departments vary from town to town, so it's not always an apples to apples comparison. So it's helpful to go through these benchmarks, these comparable benchmarks, and look at them to see where you stand, look at the outliers, look where there could be improvement or changes, but it's not the only guidance that we would offer in terms of evaluating where you are with your fire department. But you'll see we used Bellingham, East Longmeadow, Northborough, Northbridge, and Southbridge for comparability. I just happened to pick this particular slide that compares cost per call and cost per capita of providing these services. And of course it varies because you may have a different revenue stream for your EMS services than other communities and so forth. So there's a lot of things to take a look at with regard to comparable services. We hope that you look at the recommendations as being opportunities for change, for growth, for improvement, and for reaching a strong and vibrant future for your community. So with regard to organization, we certainly suggest that the current impact shift that was established to ensure that you have enough EMS units on the road be continued, using ARPA money for that. We think that is a good stopgap measure until you are able to round the clock, improve your staffing levels. You have applied for a Department of Homeland Security SAFER grant, which would provide additional staffing. You've asked the federal government to provide funding for 12 additional positions. We think that would be very important to implement. If you don't get that grant, we would suggest hiring 8 firefighter paramedics as soon as possible. Now, you may wonder why we said 8 and you've applied for 12. Well, we're looking financially, saying to be as fiscally responsible in that recommendation. Certainly 12 would be ideal, but for the immediate time, we think that 8 would be a good start. We're also recommending reorganizing the shift staffing. Currently, the shift supervisor, a captain, rides on the engine, and so he or she really has 2 major responsibilities. One is being the immediate supervisor for that engine company, which means interior firefighting, but he or she is also the incident commander, which requires them to be outside the building, making all kinds of decisions that affect the operational tactics and the safety of the firefighters responding. It's impossible to do both jobs. So we're suggesting moving that captain to a command car, which gives them more supervisor responsibility even on day-to-day activities, and then having a lieutenant in that engine company. So you would have a lieutenant at each station in addition to the captain. We're also recommending, based on the workload, that you hire an additional fire inspector. This is based on the current workload and the projected future growth, and also to be able to accommodate ongoing inspections that are required of existing buildings. You also have only one administrative person in the fire department. If that person retires or is on vacation or disappears, there's nobody to do those critical functions like payroll, like permitting, other activities. So hiring a clerk for the Fire Prevention Bureau to help them with the backlog of work there, but also as a fill-in for that administrative assistant at headquarters would be critical. And then we've identified some future things to be thinking about, an additional 8 firefighter EMTs to staff a basic life support ambulance, establishing a full-time training officer position, and considering the establishment of an assistant fire chief. So, moving on to stations, as I said, we didn't dwell on the fire station issues other than we fully concur with your initiative underway to replace your existing fire stations. They are really are not meeting the needs of the community today. You do have a critical issue in that the current alerting system within the stations needs to be upgraded. It just is not audible. The firefighters can't hear it. They rely on their cell phones, their pager, their two-way radios to hear calls, and that's just not a good thing. There's some technology issues that we think would be actually relatively easy to accomplish. There are tablets in the apparatus for incident command and pre-planning that are not being used to their full capabilities. So there needs to be some training and some standard operating guidelines established for that. And then there should be an expectation that the fire department take advantage of the town's GIS system, which is critical to fire department operations. That's a data piece that's absolutely essential for pre-planning and for operations. We think that it would be helpful to have a IT needs assessment for the fire department. Fire departments are sort of an anomaly when it comes to IT because there are a lot of activities that the fire departments adopt specialized programs or kind of cobble together equipment or apps and so forth, not really looked at from a systemic standpoint that may not tie in exactly with the town's IT system. So you're not unique in that respect, but there really needs to be somebody to come in with that expertise to look at your IT capabilities and build on that and enhance that, because it really is critical in this day and age. And one other thing, although we did look at fire department communications, it was not a primary focus of our study. We did see some security deficiencies in the town's emergency communications center. The good news is that the Department of Homeland Security regional protective security advisors will come in and do a free security assessment. We've introduced the police chief to that. We strongly encourage you to do that, and that will help you in your decision-making on future communications and facility needs. Apparatus, again, you have a good capital replacement program in place. We did see some deficiencies in terms of prioritization of emergency vehicles for repair and maintenance. So we encourage that all emergency vehicles get that high priority. We also know that you're now without a reserve fire pumper. So I would suggest that you look at borrowing, leasing, or even buying a good used frontline or good pumper that could be put in service until the pumper that has been ordered is going to arrive, and that's going to be another year or so before that gets here. It's like 2 years out to get a new fire truck these days. Future, we suggest for your maintenance shop, hiring emergency vehicle technicians or one or more that are certified in that respect, and even long-term considering a regional initiative for municipal vehicle repair, because you're not the only community that's in this situation. A couple of issues with mutual aid. You have a very strong fire mutual aid district, a very strong EMS district, but as I think you're probably aware, there have been some issues with the Worcester EMS. Now, I know the town manager and the fire chief have been aggressively working on this. This is not a problem unique to Auburn, so we would suggest that the EMS district take the lead on that with some pushing from Auburn to address the overuse of EMS resources to go into the city of Worcester. They have challenges with staffing and hiring and number of calls, but the area communities should not be carrying that burden on a daily basis. And the same with Worcester Fire Department, for some reason has a strange policy of not providing station coverage to mutual aid communities, and that should be reciprocal. So that needs to continue to be addressed, again, by the mutual aid district. Getting to closing now, we encourage you to continue with this type of strategic planning. You have a great command staff that understands strategic planning, understands the NFPA standards, and working in collaboration with their operational staff and the union, I think can continue to work on master planning, using the recommendations in this report, using the NFPA standards, and they'll continue with that activity. There are lots of metrics that can be used in addition with your town planning department. You've got a great community risk reduction program in the fire department that looks at these issues, and continuing to use the NFPA standards as benchmarks will serve the community very well into the future. So the challenge ahead is steadily increasing requests for service in a fast-growing community. We haven't even touched on the whole disaster environment, which, as you well know, with climate change and other reasons, disasters are increasing in severity and frequency. That's the life we live in today. Your fire and EMS services, along with your emergency management director, are at the forefront of that, and they will continue to have to attend to that. And just to continue with the long-term development of your organization, its personnel, facilities, technology, equipment, and you will be well served in the future. We hope that you'll give careful thought to each of these recommendations, plug them into your budgeting, plug them into your master planning, to your capital planning, and as you accomplish these things, recognize that accomplishment, because it's to the credit of the community and its citizens. And I can't emphasize enough, from our perspective, how well served your community is by its public servants that we encountered, not just in the fire department, but in your town department heads, your leadership, and in the fire and EMS services. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from the board members?
So all the recommendations for staffing that took into account two separate facilities. Was there ever a discussion about all one central facility and what the staffing needs would look like there, or are they irrelevant?
I couldn't quite hear.
So your staffing recommendations based
Yes.
on two locations, if it was one location, would that change your staffing?
Well, we certainly would not recommend, given the response times in the communities, we wouldn't recommend going down to one facility, at least from what our limited work at looking at kind of the geography of the community. You would still have, I believe that you would still have those staffing needs, because the demands for service are such that you'd still need at least 2 engine companies, at least 3 ambulances, plus the ability to staff an aerial ladder or a heavy rescue. So I don't think your staffing levels would change. Chief, do you? Come over to the microphone for.
I don't think it's really going to serve any purpose to, if you were to merge the two stations together. A couple of things. What we're trying to do is address an activity issue where you have 37% of your runs are simultaneous. Depending on, where they are, for that number really doesn't make a difference. You need a certain amount of resources to address those. And 37% is a staggering number. I mean, I looked at this for a long time, and it's really, that's a lot. Even when you take the Worcester EMS impact, we did a 3-year average. So yes, there was a big increase in the third year, in the most recent year, But it was also that 3-year average takes that into account. So even if that 37% was 25%, I'd be telling you that that's a staggering number. It's a big, big number. So it's hard to address that any other way than with resources, not so much geography. The other thing is that 70-some-odd% of your runs are EMS. And by centralizing a station here, especially with the grid work of transportation you have out there, is going to slow up your responses significantly. Again, we haven't really looked at it, but safe to say it's going to slow it up significantly. And those recommended timeframes to get to somebody's house who's having a heart attack or some other serious medical emergency, they'll be sacrificed in many situations by doing that. It's good thought, but those of us in the business, you can look at it and it just doesn't work.
I had another question regarding that 37% of the same time. Is that pretty consistent same time of day, or is that through the 24-hour period it happens all over, or can we say like a big chunk of it is during like morning rush hour or evening rush hour?
I'd have to pull up we have that data, but as I recall, one of the reasons you put the impact shift on during the daytime, Monday through Saturday, is because that's the peak hours for you. So, yeah, it does vary. Obviously, the number, nighttime is a very quiet time, but that's when you have your life loss fires. So, it's critical to keep that staffing going around the clock.
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. That was very informative. Just one question from me. What would you say, or would it be safe to say that the 8 firefighter EMS or the 12, depending on that SAFER grant, would be the most urgent need, or?
Say that again?
What would you say the most urgent need based on those recommendations are?
We think it's a staffing issue because you have so many times, because of these simultaneous calls, that the community is really vulnerable because 1 or 2 ambulances is out on a call, or you're tied up with an accident out on or a crash out on the turnpike or on the interstate. So you've got really, really low coverage in the community. So we think that and plus the impact on just the wear and tear on the troops is pretty bad.
All right, thank you. Any questions from town administration?
No questions so far, just I think there's a lot of information to absorb. I know we sent the study to you last week. Feel free to ask us any questions. We can always bring the chief or the deputy chief in at a future date if you have questions that we could share with the entire board. There was a lot of information there. I think just one comment I want to make as a follow-up to a statement that Dawn made about Worcester EMS. And yes, the chief and I have met with the city of Worcester officials, and we've met with UMass, and we've met with, forgive me, Steve, thank you, I couldn't recall his title. So we did have a meeting at the Worcester Fire Department about this. This is an issue that's gone on for maybe up to a year. It just seemed to get heightened about 2 months ago, so we immediately had a meeting, and I think we've resolved some of the issues, if not most, but at least we know that there's a plan in place on the Worcester side to address some of those issues that they were having that was causing repercussions on us. That being said, I just also wanted to be clear that over the years, if you look at the long term, the city of Worcester's provided more mutual aid to Auburn than Auburn's probably provided to Worcester.
Mutual aid is still a good thing, absolutely.
Mutual aid is a good thing. You can't, it's against the law to not do it during mutual aid. But I think it's important to note that over the years, there's this healthy blend. There are going to be periods where Auburn needs it more, and there are going to be periods where Worcester needs it more. It just so happened that it all came at once, and a lot of it is due to the labor issue, staffing shortages, as well as pandemic-related calls that have increased since the pandemic, because where someone may have originally thought, I'm not going to call an ambulance, now with the pandemic, that might be their first call instead of their last call. So that is being addressed, but I just wanted to be clear, mutual aid is still a great thing for us. We just have to find a way, working with Worcester and UMass, to make sure that the burden doesn't always come on Auburn or any of the other communities, because if it doesn't come on Auburn, it's going to go on another community. And again, that affects our mutual aid for station coverage. So it's a complicated issue, but it is being looked at. We just wanted to assure the board. Chief?
Through the chair. And to that point, the requests for mutual aid have gotten significantly better since we had that meeting, to a level that I'm comfortable with even moving forward. If we were to get the amount of requests that we're getting now, to me, that is a completely reasonable number based on a total percentage of call volume that's consistent with really all of that percentage from all of the other communities that we provide mutual aid to. So since that meeting, that situation has gotten considerably better.
Okay. One more question, Chief, that I did want to ask you. The technology piece, is that a concern of yours? And do you have thoughts that maybe we could help out in terms of that technology part?
Excuse me. I think when it comes to the technology, if you look at the amount of apps and programs and things that we have for call notification for alerts to cell phones, to fire reporting, to ambulance reporting, which is in 2 separate systems. There's a lot there. I think the issues, and the deputy could probably speak to this better than I can because he oversees a lot of the IT piece. I think in some respects where we're seeing issues on the IT side is with the cybersecurity issues and the way that the parameters on the system are getting locked down. I think everybody understands in scope the idea of cybersecurity prevention and locking a system down. But in some respects, we're locking the system down to a point where the programs that we're trying to run and utilize, we don't have the speed in order to do it. So it's limiting the functions of our programs operating every day because we just keep shrinking those parameters in order to keep our system safe. I don't know that that's something we're going to be able to solve today, because I think the issue of cybersecurity is ever changing. But I think especially on the EMS side with reporting, I think we are seeing some significant issues when it comes to how our systems are being utilized based on a lot of the practices that have been put in place to try to secure our system.
Okay.
I just have one question of the chief,
Yes.
or maybe the deputy. Steve, when do you expect to hear on the application for the SAFER grant? When is that?
So the SAFER grant usually starts getting awarded right about this time, end of July through August, maybe the early part of September, but the bulk of the awards typically come out around August. So we should start seeing really any time now FEMA start announcing some grant awards.
And did I hear correctly that if the town were to get awarded on this next round, that the 3-year funding period is 100% for each year?
That is correct. FEMA did change their parameters, so if we were to receive the grant, there would be no match like the previous SAFER grant that we're wrapping up actually this year. So all 3 years for the grant would be funded 100% for the 3 years. Mr. Chairman, just one more point, just to the question about the fire stations. The fire station, the Public Safety Building Committee met last week and officially took a vote that will be coming to this board at some point, but they officially took a vote last week to make a recommendation to maintain 2 fire station sites. As you know, we've gone out with an RFP for land on 2 separate occasions that yielded no response for land. So as I stated to the committee last week, I had always been in favor of looking at a joint facility, providing we could find the right location that would not impact response times. Where that does not appear to be the case, I cannot, in good faith and consciousness, recommend the closure of a fire station. If we don't know, and here's what we know. We know that there is no central location to place a fire station at this point that will not affect response times. So with that said, My recommendation to the committee, as well as town administration in consultation with them, the committee voted to pursue the construction of a new police and fire headquarters on the current West Street location, and then maintain our current fire headquarters facility as a Station 2. So that was the recommendation of the committee that ultimately will come before this board for further discussion at some point.
That stands to, I mean, since the first day I was Board of Selectmen, I knew that priority was call times, and that was backed up tonight in the presentation, so
Yes.
that certainly stands
Yeah,
to.
we have extremely good response times, and, you know, we just can't do anything to jeopardize that.
And through the chair, we plan on bringing that recommendation to you in August. They met Monday night, but as a result of that, I reached out to town council with a couple of questions. So as soon as I get all the information from town council, it wasn't in time for this agenda, so I can bring it to the board on August 22nd.
Okay. Any further questions, comments from the board? No? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the board.
Thank you.